We studied last week that Genesis chapter 4 shows us the lineage of Cain, a line of men that had forsaken God and relied wholly on their own strength. The genealogy that follows in Genesis chapter 5, however, introduces a genealogy of faith that begins with Adam's new son, Seth. The emergence of the line of Seth in a world stained by Cain's unbelief and his act of murder meant a new hope and a new beginning for all of mankind. The genealogy of Seth introduces Noah at the end of chapter 5 of Genesis. He is a central figure in God's administration over the redemption of mankind. Noah stands in history as a foreshadow or example of the coming Messiah. As the second coming Christ will save God's chosen at the last judgment, so Noah saved his family through the first judgment, the Great Flood. At the time of the flood, when the Bible records that God was sorry that he made mankind, Noah was esteemed by God, and God establishes his covenant with him and promises to save Noah and his family from the judgment. He also provided Noah with instruction on how to avoid the judgment. Now Noah was born 126 years after Adam died, so we must ask ourselves, how did Noah have the faith to do as God asked? In this study, we're going to examine the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 in detail to see if we can arrive at that answer. To begin, I want to see if we can start adding dates to these studies. The name of this channel, after all, is the History of Redemption, and what kind of history channel would this be if I didn't give you the dates in history when these events occurred? Putting the events that we study on a timeline will help us greatly in the future when we are able to connect biblical history with world history. I promise you, once you can see that biblical history and world history do in fact line up, your faith in the Word of God and its complete inerrancy will be bolstered. Knowing the years that these events occurred goes a long way to making them more real to you. Remember that Moses commands us to consider the years of all generations in Deuteronomy 32:7, and putting these events on a timeline will aid us in doing that. One biblical reference point that I think most of us know about is the year of the Exodus, the year that God liberated the Israelites from the nation of Egypt through the 10 plagues. Now, to arrive at the year of the Exodus, we must find a date in the Bible that we can tie to world history. The third king to rule over the nation of Israel was King Solomon, the son of King David. And in 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1, we are given information regarding the beginning of his reign. Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. It is common knowledge, held by most historians, that Solomon began his reign in 970 BC. And thus, this verse states that the construction of God's temple began in 966 BC, the 4th year of Solomon's reign. In this verse, the author records that this was also the 480th year after the Exodus. So the year of the Exodus, then, was 1446 BC, 966 plus 480 years. Do you see now why it's important to put these things on a timeline? We now, from one verse of the Bible, are able to put 3 events on a timeline that we can reference with world history, to see what was occurring in world history outside of redemptive history, and give reference to the events occurring in God's administration. Let's continue. Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 through 41 records how long the nation of Israel spent in Egypt. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years, and at the end of 430 years to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. If Israel entered Egypt 430 years prior to the Exodus, that would mean that Israel entered Egypt in the year 1876 BC, 1446 plus 430 years. Israel had done this due to a famine that had struck during the time. Jacob and his family moved to Egypt because through a series of events, Jacob's son Joseph had ended up as prime minister over all of Egypt and was capable of sustaining his family there. Genesis 47 verses 6 through 9 provides us with Jacob's age at that time. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Set your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days that they were sojourning." Jacob, the father of the nation of Israel, whose name was later changed to Israel by God himself, tells Pharaoh that he is 130 years old when he enters Egypt. Jacob then was born 130 years prior to 1876 BC in 2006 BC. The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 25 verse 27 that Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born. Thus Isaac was born in 2066 BC. And in Genesis chapter 21 verse 5, we find that Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. That means Abraham was born in 2166 BC. And now that we have the year of Abraham's birth, we can use the years recorded in the genealogies of Genesis chapters 11 and 5 to come to the year that Adam was formed by God. I won't bore you with those numbers, but here's a chart. By taking the year that the father was at the age of procreation, and the year we know that the offspring was born, we can calculate all the way back to Adam's creation in 4114 BC. Okay, that took a while, but now that we have a foundation to work off of, let's begin the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5. In the genealogy of Adam to Noah in Genesis chapter 5, there is no additional information for the lives of Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, or Methuselah. We can use the translation of their name to gain an understanding of the possible lives that they led, but we'll save that for a later study. For now, know that their longevity testifies of their godly lives of faith. We covered last week that longevity was God's special blessing bestowed upon those who live godly lives. All the patriarchs from Adam to Noah enjoyed astonishing longevity, excluding Enoch, who was taken up to heaven without ever seeing death at the age of 365. 7 men in this genealogy lived over 900 years old. Noah, the last man listed in Genesis chapter 5, lived to be 950 years old. I mentioned in my last video that the reason for such longevity was to preserve this godly line. God wanted to deepen and strengthen their faith. So now let me show you what I meant by that. Genesis chapter 5 verse 5 records that Adam lived 930 years. After the fall, one can imagine that Adam and Eve testified about their blessed lives before the fall, their fellowship with God, and the conditions in Eden. All of their descendants probably received a full account from Adam about the eternal world prior to the fall, their spiritual experiences, Satan's deception, the consequences for disobedience, and the promise of salvation through the Messiah that God spoke of as the seed of the woman. We must remember their longevity, though. These days, a man is lucky if he gets to see his great-grandchildren. I have been truly blessed in the fact that my grandfather has been able to spend a considerable amount of time with my son. But how many generations in this line did Adam get to see? Let's figure that out. Looking through Genesis chapter 5, we see that Adam had his son Seth at the age of 130 years old, and Seth had his son Enoch at the age of 105. To find out how old Adam was when his grandson was born, we simply need to add Seth's age of procreation to Adam's, and find out that Adam was 235 years old when Enoch was born. If we continue this all the way down through Genesis chapter 5, we find that Noah's father Lamech, the 9th generational descendant from Adam, was born when Adam was 874 years old. Given that, we can see that Lamech and Adam lived contemporaneously for 56 years before Adam finally died at the age of 930. Now when I say contemporaneously, that means at the same time. You can't prove biblically that they lived together in the same area, but you can conjecture that they did speak and that Adam did testify to Lamech the things that occurred in the Garden of Eden. Let's read Genesis chapter 5 verses 28 through 29. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work, from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed." Giving his son the name Noah, Lamech hoped that Noah would in fact be the seed of the woman that was promised to Adam. We can see this in the meaning of the name Noah being rest, and the fact that Lamech named him this because, as verse 29 here states, "This one will give us rest from our work, from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed." Remember the judgment against the ground after the fall of Adam? Had Adam not been testifying about that event, how would Lamech have known about it? We also know that the knowledge of this event had a great impact on Lamech's life because it affected the naming and the hopes he had for his son Noah. Lamech's grandfather, Enoch, was 65 years old when he had Lamech's father, Methuselah, and Enoch was 252 years old when Lamech was born. Thus Lamech lived 113 years contemporaneously with Enoch, who the Bible records as having walked with God in Genesis chapter 5 verse 22. Both Lamech and his father Methuselah witnessed Enoch's godly life and his walk with God. Surely they were raised under a godly influence, since their father and grandfather respectively was in the process of walking with God. Hopefully, without getting too sidetracked, I want to focus for a moment on Enoch before getting back to Noah. Enoch is only recorded as having walked with God after the birth of his son Methuselah at the age of 65. The name Methuselah is a combination of two Hebrew words, mut, meaning die or kill, and selah, meaning sent away, or let go. Methuselah's name means then, when he is dead, it shall be sent. Coincidentally, if you do the math, you find that Methuselah died in the 600th year of Noah's life. This is the year that the Bible records in Genesis chapter 7 verse 6 as the year of the flood. Methuselah died the year of the flood. One can assume then that Enoch, his father, received a premonition of the flood judgment, since he named his son, upon his death it shall come, and when Methuselah died, the flood occurred. This knowledge must have caused Noah's great-grandfather Enoch to live his entire life strictly walking with God, because he had no way of knowing when Methuselah would die. He simply knew that upon his death the judgment would come. After Methuselah's birth, the Bible records that Enoch walked with God for 300 years, and then without ever seeing death, was taken up into heaven by God at the age of 365. These are the ancestors and predecessors of Noah. It is no wonder that Noah had the faith to listen to and obey God, because he must have been taught to do so from childhood. Adam, who had first-hand knowledge of the fall of man, transferred that knowledge to Noah's father, who embraced it, and Noah's great-grandfather is only one of two people in history to have ever entered heaven without ever seeing death, the second being Elijah during the time of the kings of Israel. Enoch must have passed his faith on to his son and grandson, who would have then transferred the knowledge to Noah. In Matthew chapter 24 verse 37, Jesus Christ states that the end times will be just like the days of Noah. Next week, we'll examine how Noah survived the great flood, and how Noah was a foreshadow of Jesus Christ, and how Jesus would save you and I from the final judgment. Until then, this is Deacon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this study, please give the video a thumbs up, and also subscribe so you can keep up to date with my latest videos when they're released. And God bless.